The following is a presentation of the Matt Talk Podcast Network.
It's a Short Time Wrestling podcast on location here at the Mall of America. The second time we've actually had to do a show from Rick Bronson's House of Comedy. They've got Killer Poutine here with our guest, Mike Vecchione, stand-up comic, former wrestler, and a guy he's a little jet-lagged right now, coming off a trip from China. Tell us about that trip to China. What were you checking out there?
I was wrestling in the World Nationals. I'm just kidding. There's no
World Nationals?
I made it up.
That's pretty impressive.
I made it up. No, I was up there doing comedy, and it was pretty unbelievable. I was in 4 different cities in China, and then Singapore, and then Malaysia, and then I came back. So it was a wonderful experience.
Well, in some of your routines, you can get your album on iTunes. Last one, I believe you put it out in 2014, or one that's there. You do talk about TSA. You talk about travel a lot.
Right.
Long-haul flight from Asia to here. I mean, how brutal is that for you, and how do you cope with that type of travel?
It actually wasn't that bad this time. I went to Australia maybe 8 years ago, 2009, and that was a way more brutal flight for me. That was like a 21 or 22-hour flight. This one was 15 to Hong Kong from New York, and then another like 4.5 or 5 to Chengdu. So it wasn't actually that bad, I didn't think, and I recovered pretty well. But I got to say, the TSA in China is like they're much more on it. Like, they have a thing about lighters. You're not allowed to have a lighter. And the guy was like, you have a lighter in your bag? I'm like, no, I don't. He's like, yes, you do. I'm like, no, I don't. He goes in my bag and pulls out a lighter. I'm like, that's pretty unbelievable. And then he looked at me and he's like, and your father died of respiratory illness. Like, he knew. He could see. He was a seer. I mean, those guys were really unbelievable.
I remember, I think, going through BWA one time, and this is when I was smoking. I don't smoke anymore. It's been probably 10 years since I've had a cigarette. And going through, it's like, and I look, and I go through my bag when I get back to where I was going. I was like, wow, I had 4 lighters in here, and
wow.
Just went on through. But now, what's the craziest thing you've had confiscated through TSA? You're like, I can't.
Oh, it's always when I take a water through, and then they grab, like, I'm like, because I don't realize I have the water, and they take it out like I'm trying to sneak a bomb in. They're like, yeah.
Well,
like, really? You don't have any water? I'm like, I'm sorry. I forgot that I had water in my... Because you go through so many checkpoints after a while that you're like, you just forget that you have it. So,
I hate when you buy a bottle of water past the checkpoint, and then you go to get on the plane. Like, I was going through Bangkok a couple years ago, coming back from Junior Worlds. I bought it at the airport after going through security. Oh, you can't bring it on. I'm like, what am I going to do with 8-hour flight? Come on, give me some water. But the reason we're talking with you, you're on tour here. You're going through this Canadian-owned vestige of comedy. I've been here before. I've seen shows here before. Is this your first time?
No, I've been here through several times. I love this club. It's great. It's a great club. It's always a great time here. They're very good to me here. Yeah.
Interesting. This club is situated in one of the giant economic booms of this country, the Mall of America. I mean, how does this compare to other spots that you've worked rooms?
I like it a lot because they care about the comedy here, so it's great. And so it's there's a lot of other options. You know what I mean? You can fight a Lego man. You can take a roller coaster. You know, there's all kinds of Forever 21, Jamba Juice. Like, there's all kinds of options. You know, after comedy. You know, it's not just about comedy. It's like there's other consumer options, I think.
Well, this is also a place you can probably draw some inspiration. Be like, man, have you been to the Mall of America? You know, I had to park here. We were coming up to meet. I had to go through the Forever 21 to get here. And
oh, really?
I never wanted to get out of someplace so fast in my life.
Oh, I thought you were stay there and do some light shopping.
No, I do have 3 girls at home, but let's hope there's no Forever 6 yet. And it's one thing to try to throw a joke at a comedian and get a little chuckle. You just made my day here.
No, that's great. I like it.
Let's go back in time a little bit. Part of this show, and those who listen know that.
I thought the show was designed 3-2-2. Is that how?
College still 3-2-2. I was more of a 1-1-1 guy because my career was terrible, and I remember doing an intramural tournament. Me and the guy I was wrestling actually took injury time to take a smoke break.
That's great.
And then we finished the match. That was 18 years ago. That was
that's really great.
I lost that one. Pretty handily, but. You grew up, you said, in Ohio before
I grew up in Ohio, and I started wrestling in Ohio in 8th grade. I had a friend talk me into, who I'm still friends with today. He talked me into coming out from, like, I was playing football, and we were playing the football team together, and he was like, come out for wrestling. It's great to keep you in shape in the off season, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, why not? And then the whole first year of wrestling in 8th grade, I thought we were being punished. I didn't know that was the training.
Why would anybody do this for fun, right?
Yeah, it's crazy hard. It was crazy hard. And you know, I couldn't even believe they had it because I thought football was kind of tough. Like, this blew football away, everything in football away, the training. And I'm like, I can't believe they have this in public schools. This is so hard. It's so brutal, you know. But I stuck with it, you know.
And you moved to Florida. You had a pretty good high school career down there?
Yeah, I wrestled varsity sophomore because I was in Ohio. It was tough. I had a good team, very good team, and a good coach. And then we moved to Florida, and it was more like about individuals down there versus a team. Like, I had a very structured team in Ohio, and it was more about individuals. And my coach was great. I love him, but it was just like a different program down there. And I don't think wrestling was as developed in Florida as it was obviously in Ohio. So I struggled a little bit wrestling varsity, and then senior year I caught fire and had a really good year and went to states and placed in states. You know, who I still keep in touch with, the guy who beat me in states. We're friends on Facebook. He's such a great guy, supportive of my career and everything.
Well, who was that, to give him a little bit?
I'll give him a shout out. His name is Harris Brummer. He went to St. Thomas Aquinas, and
sounds like a guy who would go to a school named St. Thomas Aquinas.
It sounds like a guy who would beat the pants off of me, which he did twice. He would once in the semifinals of regionals, and then once in the state finals. He beat me. Yeah, very, very tough. He was a tough kid, and he went to Army. He went to West Point, I believe.
And
so
you chose Penn State.
I went to Penn State, and I walked on, and it was very, very tough. What a great group of guys I was around, though, man. Such a group of guys that I'm still friends with today. And I had just a great group of guys, and we had a really good, we were like, I wrestled freshman year, and I didn't wrestle after that, but we were third in the country that year. And it's like, now, the Penn State now is just like the Chicago Bulls, or, you know, they're like the Iowa of the past. They're just like win title upon title upon title. And I can't imagine how tough that room is now. But when I was there, the room was very, very tough, you know, because state champs all up and down the lineup, you know, all Americans. And Jeff Prescott was a national champ at 118. And I remember he wrestled. We had a guy named Sean Nelson from Ohio who wrestled Prescott off at 118. And Prescott's a returning national champion, and Sean really pushed him. Like, it was a pretty close match in wrestle off. So Prescott wins his spot and goes on to win nationals again. And Sean Nelson had to go to 126, and he takes like third at 126. So it's like, that's what kind of a crazy room it was. So there's a lot of talent, a lot of talented guys who didn't break the lineup. You know, that's how tough it was. So
was that the Fritz era?
It was the last year of Lorenzo, and then those guys wrestled. My friends wrestled into the Fritz era, and but I was glad to see Troy because, you know, have the team for a while, and I know he's still. I don't know what team he's with now, Troy Sunderland, but like he was on the team too. He was very, very tough and a good guy. So him and Dave Hart. So I was glad to see him have the team for a while. You know, coach the team, because the guys still had a connection to the team. Like now it's like the guys I wrestle with, most of them don't have that connection because, you know, the guy's not a Penn State guy. He's unbelievable, but, you know, at least we had that connection, you know.
I was at State College last weekend for the second leg of this Final X, and, you know, Rec Hall, now they pack it to the gills. It's sold out, I think, 40-something straight dual meets. And how much time do you actually have to keep up with wrestling? Do you even pay much attention to it?
I do, like during the nationals and stuff. Like I'll go back and forth with Greg Warren a little bit just to see who's who. But I really have to, and I have friends. A couple of my friends are coaches in Pennsylvania, and I do their benefits every year. And they have good summer programs, and their high school programs are very good. So I go back and visit them, and we all kind of keep up that way. Yeah, it's. I do kind of I try to keep up as much as possible, but mostly around nationals, you know. Yeah, I'll tell you what I really have been trying to, like. Sorry to cut you off, but
you're the topic here, not me.
I really want to go see Pennsylvania. I went to nationals the one year with Greg Warren. Was such a he did such a great thing. He brought me down to, I worked the club in St. Louis and went to nationals like a few years ago. And it was an unbelievable experience. It was so great. And now I want to go to, Pennsylvania States one year and just get a hotel room and just like watch, like go to all the sessions and watch, because it's a very high level of competition there. So.
Yeah, Hershey that's where my wife and I were staying last week when we were in State College. Made the 2-hour drive up there, and tell you want to talk about a zoo? You want to get some material?
Yeah.
Forget Mall of America. Go to Chocolate World.
Yeah, yeah.
You want to talk about economic? Let's just put things in front of little kids and say, right. I want that. I came up with so many stuffed Hershey Kisses.
Wow.
Anyway, but as we talk now back to comedy and keeping up with wrestling, and then you've mentioned Greg Warren, and there's a couple comics that have got wrestling backgrounds. Adam Hunter's been on the show.
Yeah.
Joe Narvaez, a friend of mine's coaching at NYU, and how many times do you come across other comics that next thing you know, you see they got a little cauliflower ear and you strike up a conversation about wrestling?
It just depends. There's some guys who've wrestled in like middle school, but and I didn't go to, like, Greg went to the highest levels, and I know that Adam Hunter was very good, very, very, very tough. And Joe is a college wrestler also. So, but I think, like, if you do it in middle school, like, not in high school, I don't know if you got the total feel for, like, the weight cutting and the brutality of it, So it's like, I think there's a small group, and mostly of the guys you just mentioned, who are well established. Like, you have to kind of have both things. You have to have wrestled long enough, and you have to have done comedy long enough. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know how much I have in common with a guy. Like, I have a wrestling in common with a guy who wrestled and I wrestled, but he's like 1 year into comedy and I'm 18 years into comedy. Not that I'm better than anybody, but it's like 18 years into comedy versus 1 year to comedy. It's better when it's like these guys like Greg Warren. When Greg was like way better than me in wrestling. He was an All-American, but like, and he's been doing comedy longer also. But I have a formidable time in wrestling and in comedy, so it's like there's that.
Like
I think it has
the
to
first
be
year kid coming out for the team as a senior.
Yeah.
But wrestling the kid who's been wrestling since he was 5. So
yeah.
There's a little bit of a learning curve there.
Yeah, you have more in common with the people who have a foot in both worlds. That's what I find anyway.
Another guy who's big into wrestling and has been on the show before, Brooks Wheelan. He spent some time on
he was
Saturday Night.
Unbelievable.
He was telling me on the show that he would be on SNL talking about, did you see the Jordan Bros match? Nobody had any idea what he was talking about.
His brothers are like Iowa champs, right? And he was like a runner-up in Iowa.
Good wrestling family, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it's funny because people outside of wrestling, I know that with Greg, like, I say this on every time anybody asks me about him, and people like, they're like, oh, was Greg good? I'm like, he was in all, like, and he's so humble that he won't stroke himself, but I'm like, people don't realize what an All-American is, like what it takes to be an All-American.
You're not named an All-American. You earn it.
You earn it. It's unbelievable. And he has some stories like his stories are great, like wrestling Pat Smith. Like Pat Smith's beating him like 10-zip and not breaking a sweat. It's like really, really funny. Like stuff that you can, like, I don't know if you're not a wrestler, if you can appreciate that. I really can appreciate it. It really makes me laugh, And the way he tells it is fantastic too. But he wrestled at a very, very high level. And what I'm saying is, like, to outsiders, they're like, "Oh, you wrestled and he wrestled." It's like, yeah,
I was like a match.
It's like, no question. It's like I was a throwing dummy for guys like him. He was like a pristine All-American. He's like a guy that I was dreaming to be, but never could cut it. Really, if I'm being honest. So, from a distance, if you don't have the knowledge of the sport, you don't know. Like Brooks is a guy who's like a runner-up in, like, unbelievable. You know how hard the state tournament is in Iowa? It's insane. Like, it's insanely hard. But it looks like from a distance, it looks like, oh, you were a runner-up in Florida. He was a runner-up in Iowa. It's like, yeah, that state is insanely crazy. I wouldn't have, I'm not cutting myself down, but I would have made the state tournament in Iowa, I don't think. Maybe I would have made it, but that would have been it. Like, placing is just insane.
I hear. I was just trying to make the team in high school, and that actually didn't happen. But
my Ohio team was, like, very hard to make. Like, I would have had to wrestle my best friend who was better than me. I would have had to wrestle him off for the weight or go up or down. Cut a lot of weight or go up and take a beating. It would have been tough.
Comedy, life on the road gives you it makes you take a beating. It tears you up, like you were saying. You're a little jet lagged a little bit, but
right.
How many nights a year are you on the road, and how do you kind of create some type of normalcy out of that?
It's not so much like I'm on the road as much as I can be. I'm trying to get more like on the road because I want to make money. That's where we make money, on the road. But the thing is, like, It used to be get more TV, and I have good credits, but it's like get more TV and get out on the road. But now it's like not a direct correlation between getting TV and getting on the road. It's like a podcast will break you. It's like something else, like all of these little. You're not sure, an Instagram. Like we have all these different forms of media now that will get you a following, and it's like, it's hard to put your finger on what could break you. But the point is, like, to break and then to go on the road and to have more of a draw and therefore make more money. That's the goal of it.
And you're based out of New York City, correct?
Based out of New York City. Yeah.
That seems to be, Greg Warren moved there a couple years ago. He was in the Midwest. Now he's in New York, and I've seen. We
drove him out. You can tell him I said that. We drove him out with a series of head snaps and Russian tie. I don't know.
Well, you know what they call a Russian tie in Moscow?
What?
A tie.
A tie.
Yeah, another. I've been using that one for years. That's terrible.
With a series of foot sweeps and front headlocks, we drove Greg Warren back to St. Louis. I'm proud to say.
Because I went out there and I saw him in Queens one night with a couple other guys at a place called Laughing Devil, which it's a pretty cool spot. And I've actually seen Joe Narvaez perform at Caroline's, which is, if anybody, as a somewhat. I'm not a huge comedy fan, but I know enough about the industry to know there's places that are legendary, and Caroline's is one of those places that, to get to see a friend of yours on stage. And I actually had my Facebook photo one time. I was standing on stage. I was like, yeah, I'm here. And they're like, get off. But when you travel.
You should have had it with a single leg in the air.
Dude, I was a bad heavyweight.
You guys finish it.
Do you think I know how to finish a single leg? No.
Run the pipe.
I wrestled for 2 years. That's
Run the
terrible.
Pipe.
But
a duck under. Like, I think that's a great, maybe that's our Instagram web series where it's like, I'm hitting a duck under, and then it's like, right before you hit the next picture, it's like, what do you think happens? Like, does he defend it, or do I score? You make the call, and it's like, make your call in the comments. I think that's a good.
I'm glad to provide some type of comedic inspiration. It's not just my wife laughing at me at home.
I thought this was a pitch. I'm trying to pitch stuff. Like
you can pitch whatever you want, man. We're talking wrestling, we're talking comedy. These are a few of my favorite things. And
5 takedowns, like when I was in 8th grade.
I don't think I had 5 takedowns in my life.
Double the 5 takedowns that my coach Joe Mancini, that was his name. He taught. I'm friends with him on Facebook now. Double leg, single leg, a high crotch, fireman's carry, duck under. Those were the 5 takedowns that he taught in middle school.
What about the Loudon Swain special, the lateral drop?
I don't think throws came until later. I guess guys were doing it, but I don't know if maybe he did teach it. I think he did teach it. And I didn't think I learned the front headlock series until
it was too late.
And until high school. We learned the snap and the sprawl and spin. Snap. What was it? Snap and spin. Snap and spin. But like the front headlock series, I don't think I learned until I actually know I didn't learn it until 9th grade. But the front headlock series really, it pays off for you, especially like in college. I spent the first almost a whole year getting my head snapped into the mat. Like you get your head snapped into the mat because guys like either they shoot on you or they snap you down. You have to have a very strong neck in college. That's what I learned the hard way. Watch
this segue. Now, when you go into comedy, what's it like getting your feet wet? I mean, how often do you get your head snapped into a mat?
I mean,
proverbially.
Yeah, it's just like anything. It's like you know the terrain a little bit better. So once you go up and you have like I'm more experienced, so I have different bag of tricks. I know what I can do to manipulate the audience, and even if it's a bad situation, make it successful. But you might be you might still have to take the loss. And I know that going in, but at least I have some kind of perspective on it. Be like, oh, I'm taking the loss because of this situation, or it's a bad crowd, or it's like whatever. I know why I'm taking the loss. I'm not taking the loss. I don't get off stage and go, I'm terrible. Like maybe sometimes I'll feel that way, but I know the scope of the situation. It'll be like, oh, this was a factor. This was a factor. This was a factor. What I'm trying to say is I never blame myself. I don't take any personal responsibility for anything. I'm great. Everybody else sucks.
When you get different sizes of rooms, you get different segments. Sometimes you might get, if there's a big time headliner, you might get 20 minutes, or if you're the headliner, you get 45.
45, yeah.
And how do you balance what you throw into a show? How do you understand? Okay, is this going to be a good crowd? I mean, how quickly within a set do you know that, okay, I'm going to have to turn these people to my side, or you just know, all right, I got to get through this. This is going to be one to chalk up in the L column.
You could tell by the laughs, the level of laughs. like like you could tell, but that's the great thing about comedy. It's like, you know what the laughs you're getting back. You know what the jokes get if you've been doing them for a while. Mm-hmm. So you know what they get, and you know the level of laughter, and you can tell how, if people are laughing from their guts, like how good the room is. So if it's not a good room, you're like, oh, I might have to work this crowd a little bit more. And all rooms are different. Like I did rooms in China. I've done rooms, in fire halls in Pennsylvania. It's like, everybody has a different perspective. So you walk in and you kind of feel out what it is, and then you kind of adjust your energy level and your joke selection, and also if you're working on, if you're intent on working on new material, you'll work it. And obviously you're going to take, it's like anything. It's like wrestling. It's like you're going to take shots, you're going to take losses, but you have to keep taking shots in order to grow. It's the same thing as like, I'm trying to create a wrestling analogy, but it's really the same thing. It's like being on your feet, where it's like, be aggressive. It's like, are you just going to be defensive the entire time, or are you going to take shots? And, that's how you get better.
Oh, I can take you another wrestling analogy to you. Okay, when you get better as a wrestler, it's mat time, which we can, equate to doing it on the road. But you also got wrestling camps and learning from people better. Where did you, in your beginning of your career, really start to learn the art of comedy, and who did you really draw inspiration from, or somebody that may have helped you, like, kind of learn the ropes, so to speak?
How did I start? It really started for me. Like I started in Philly, but I was doing it once or twice a week in Philly because I had a full-time teaching job, and then moved to New York the end of 2003. And when I moved to New York, that was really the time where I picked it up, because I started doing comedy every night and multiple times a night. So then it became like a very serious thing. And the people who influenced me, one was Dave Attell, who's still a major influence on me. And Colin Quinn is another one who's an unbelievable comic. And Bill Burr was still in New York when I was coming up. So watching him, like, he was already developed, obviously, but still, like, continue to get better and better. And so I remember going to the Boston Comedy Club when I first got there. Big Jay Okerson was another guy who, like, helped me out. He was already, like, working the clubs, and already had like some basic TV, some premium blend, like TV Comedy Central credits, and he would bring me around and show me the ropes, really, of the city. And I remember watching at the Boston Comedy Club late at night, the Tony Woods, guys like Kevin Brennan, like watching those guys do it, and I'm like, these guys are on it. Like, I'd never seen anything like it, because I'd never seen comedy in New York, so I'd never seen professional comics like live work a room like that. I'm like, these guys are unbelievable, and that's what I was striving to be.
There's always the line about what becomes family friendly, or what goes into the blue. Where is your line with which type of room you're working? Obviously, if you're doing a high school benefit, you're not going to go into some of your more darker stuff. But how do you understand or decide, like, okay, this room might like some of the darker stuff?
I think it's about your persona on stage too. I mean, some guys like Big J is a guy who can pull off like stuff that another comic would get thrown out of the club for, but he has such a good persona and is so likable, which is truly him on stage. It's not fake, and the crowd can tell that. He could say almost anything and come off endearing. So I think it just matters a lot who you are, and you can tell the relationship that you have with the audience right away, and you can get away with stuff. You can kind of push the envelope a little more, and it actually works to your benefit a lot of times if you get up there and do that. Your charisma matters a great deal, because you'll have guys who are not that many years in, or they're just beginning, and they'll get up and they'll try to do it, and it's just like, they don't have the experience. I'm not saying they shouldn't try. You obviously have to try and fail in order to learn. But they get up there and they try. It becomes off abrupt, and it can come off offensive, which is fine. It's all trial and error. But the difference between that and somebody who's more seasoned, who can who figure out how to do it and be endearing.
Yeah, like the comics who are known to be offensive, they didn't start out that way. They worked into it.
Right.
One thing you talked about earlier, you touched on social media. Now with the way society is, and you look at anybody that says anything, and all of a sudden here come the people on Twitter. They're calling people to get their jobs. Right. You should be fired. I mean, it's just outrage. As a comic, you guys seem to kind of not get as much of that because this is your role, but because the way social media is and how people quickly react, have you had to try to temper certain topics from your act because that's not cool. That doesn't play anymore?
I don't know, like political stuff. I find that it's just it'll divide the room. Like, it'll divide the room. So it's like, I'm not saying I don't have political stuff, but it's just like, it just immediately, you want somebody to give you an opportunity to listen. And if you take a stand one way or the other, it's like you divide the room. It takes, even if it's a great joke, like it can divide the room in half, and that's fine, you know, if you want to do that, if you want to go that route. But like, if you do that, you know that's what's going to happen. That's just going to be a human reaction. But as far as like the offensiveness, like, you can't do comedy that way. You can't do comedy thinking about who's going to be offended. You'll never be funny. So it's like, you just kind of have to. But also, there's a thing. It's not hard and fast. It's like there's a trial and error thing. Like, I don't understand the censorship. I don't understand censorship really for comics, because if it's not funny and people don't laugh, we'll stop doing it. Like, you don't need to protest. There doesn't need to be an outrage. Nobody needs to fire you. If it doesn't get a laugh, we will stop doing it. So all you have to do is not laugh, and we'll either tinker with a joke and adjust it or throw it out completely. But nobody's going up there and doing stuff where they know it's not getting a laugh. They're just not doing it. So all this outrage and censorship and blah, 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 it's like, it's all for naught, I believe. I believe it's pretty unnecessary, you know, and people don't also realize that you don't create a joke. Like, very rarely you just create a joke that hits a home run right away. It's like, you have to tinker with it, and you have to try different versions of it. And in that process, you might offend people, but you have to respect the process. That's why you have to give credence to the process, because that's how you make something great. You know, you tinker with it and you fail, and then you readjust, and then you come out with something funny. Like, it's like the Edison thing, where it's like, you know, you have 10,000, like, him making the light bulb was not a pretty process, like a lot of failure. So I think people have to be a little bit more patient with us creative types, like, as far as failing. Let us fail. Let us fall on our face. You don't need to protest or make us feel worse. We'll get it, and then we'll readjust and, you know, hopefully make it funny.
And typically, you're not going to run into your uptight, outrage-filled people at a comedy club either.
Well, you would hope not. You would hope not.
In theory,
it almost becomes a thing. It's like, what are you doing? And it's like, and their argument is, well, you're not funny. It's like, well, be that as it may, you have to give me the opportunity. Like, you have to give me the opportunity. You're coming at a comedy club, so it's like, you have to suspend your disbelief a little bit, not take everything so seriously, and give me some space to work, you know? And then if you're still like, you know, if you still think it sucks, then, I mean, if you're on a club show in the city where it's 15-minute sets, hit the bar. You know, there's ways to do things without, like, a confrontation. Like, hit the bar until that comic gets off, and then come back, and then maybe the next comic will be your cup of tea. Or if, you know, I'm headlining this club, and they're like, no, I can't stand one more second of that guy. It's like, you can quietly go to the manager and be like, look, this guy's not my cup of tea. Can I get tickets for another show? Maybe a guy more. But everything's online now, so you can see pretty much what everybody's doing. It's like, let me get tickets for another guy. And I'm sure, like, 99% of the clubs will give you just tickets for another guy, and they'll apologize, and they'll let you go on your way. So there's ways of dealing with things, but a lot of times people do things and make these protests. It's out of pure narcissism. Like, you're not proving it. There's a way to do it where you can get the exact same, even better results, but you're choosing to, like, call attention to yourself. There's that element in it, and it's not really solving, you know, the problem and all. And it ruins the time for the other people.
When you come to a club, most people, again, are here to enjoy themselves. I know when first time I came here, I enjoyed myself. First time I was at Caroline's, I totally enjoyed myself. They've been pointing out that, hey, yeah, the guy laughing here, sitting by himself. Playing the crowd. That's one thing I really like from whether it's an acoustic musician or it's a comedian that really plays to the crowd. But also, how do you deal with hecklers, which seems to almost be people want to, hey, I'm going to go viral. I'm going to be on that guy's video because it's about them. You know, how do you deal with a heckler?
It depends how they're heckling. Like, we can all kind of tell if somebody's, like, being malicious, because after a while, like, they're not being helpful, and they know they're not being helpful. Not that any heckling is really helpful. We go up there with we're professional. We go up there with our own acts. I don't need anybody to help me. But you could tell if somebody's just, like, drunk, or, you know, you can kind of tell if they're being kind of vengeful, or if they're just drunk and kind of don't know how, or kind of being kind of drunk and dumb. So the vengefulness where they're, like, stepping on your punchlines, like, that's a problem. That's a major problem, because you're not out to have a good time. You're out to ruin everybody's time and call attention to yourself, and those people need to be ejected from the club. The other people who might accidentally say something or whatever, drunkenly say something or what, it's, I don't think that's a big deal. I think that you can overcome, but you have to judge it on a situation to situation basis. But I mean, the people should come in knowing it's like, don't heckle, don't heckle the comic,
my favorite comic who's no longer with us, Mitch Hedberg, I think he's one that I think I've never heard a comic that doesn't like Mitch. And he says, yeah, I got a great job. I get to talk for 45 minutes interrupted. You say one thing, get the out. I love his delivery and his style. One thing about delivery and style, I was listening to, you mentioned Colin Quinn, his style, the way he delivers things, it hits differently, I think, from his stand-up routine than he did when he was on Saturday Night Live. I think, you have to be a storyteller on stage and putting these stories together. How have you crafted the delivery and which stories you're weaving together? You may have, 15 different sets of jokes that are tied together, but how do you weave them into a seamless story?
That's very good. That's like a good question, because I was a joke writer for a while because I just want the individual payoff of the joke. I'd work on these jokes meticulously, but in a longer set, it's very hard to string them together and put them in bunches, and you have to kind of think of what goes where and blah, blah, blah. And it's like now I have a combination where my process is different in terms of like I'll journal. Like I'll write stuff down, notes on my phone in different situations, and then I'll journal also. So it's like a long form, and it's a more cohesive style. It's an easier style to get the jokes out in story form than just focusing on these individual jokes, I find, because the individual jokes are great, but it's like it's hard to put an hour together with each individual joke versus long form journaling helps you to like take a story and be like, okay, what's funny about this? And then the story seems more organic and less choppy in terms of like punchlines.
I was thinking about this on the way home. I was like, how do I start off an interview? And I'm sitting there thinking, I watch a lot of stand up, and I wonder,
fight in.
Well, you're wrong. Again, there's a reason I do what I do and not wrestle anymore, because I was terrible at it. But
I don't know why you made me check my weight before the podcast.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just happen to have a Tanita scale with me. I mean, it kind of comes with it. I mean,
and then I had to run for 45 minutes to drop the water weight, run and spit.
Well, this is a big mall, like you said. You could run up the anyway, I'm not going to steal your lines. That's rule number one, right? But when we look at now, you made me lose. Oh, now I figured. Now I got my train of thought. Now, come on.
That was my strategy.
That's your strategy. See, now you've got your opponent.
It's like deferring in the second period.
Yeah,
deferred, and now you're muddled. And you're.
I got it. Now it's when you start out a show. When I'm sitting there, it usually starts out something very random, like, so I was shopping the other day, or so I was talking to my girlfriend the other day. It's just a very abrupt start.
Right.
What type of start do you have for those who are unfamiliar, and how does that change from place to place?
It comes with like tinkering with like, okay, I have the base of the joke, but like maybe I can get into it differently, or maybe you're getting into it in an offensive way. It's like, I need to get into this in a non-offensive way. I need to get into this in a better way. Or instead of like, maybe there's a punchline to get into the story that's also there's also a punchline. So it's just I think a lot has to do with trying different things, just listening to tape. Listening to your tapes, and then or listening to your voice memos. I don't know what's going on. Listen to your voice
grow
memos.
Up in the 90s.
Yeah, listen to your voice memos, and like being like, oh, maybe I could do this a different way, and then trying it a different way, and then seeing how that works, and like, oh, this was better. And that's exciting. That's like an exciting thing when you have like when you start something, or you can find another punchline in there. It's like, oh, this is punched up all the way through. It's like, this is a good start. Maybe I have the good beginnings of a late night set here. Like it's pretty exciting to do that, I think.
What's the shelf life of a good series of stories or jokes? Sometimes, I'm going to use Greg Warren again because I've got a couple of his albums, and you're not hearing the same stuff on the albums. When you see him live, and I've seen him a number of times, you've seen stuff from one CD is in there, stuff from the second CD is in there, or stuff that you've only seen. Depending on in Iowa, he threw some wrestling jokes out there, which was always pretty cool to see.
Right.
But, what is the shelf life of one of your typical home run jokes that okay, now it's time, everybody's seen me do this, I gotta put this away?
I mean, I look at it like I'm not like famous in terms of I need to do everything I can do to get more known. So it's like I'll use a bit, like if I if I have to use it in a situation, I'll use it to benefit me because, and it just because not enough people know me. It's not, so I'll use it if I have to use it in any situation. But the thing with comics are we get tired of our own stuff quickly. So it's like Greg's a good example of a guy who's always writing, always turning it over. So he can do old bits. He could do new bits. He has the option. But we get tired a lot of doing the same thing. So we'll change it up. We'll mix it up. And gives us the motivation to write new. Always gives us the motivation to write new because we're tired of doing our old stuff. Not so much the crowd is tired of hearing it, but we're tired of doing it.
Goal in wrestling when you're at the high school levels, win a state championship.
Yes.
When you're in college, is win a national championship. When you're beyond, it's win an Olympic gold and world championship. In comedy, there are various ways to go. What is the, I guess, perceived goal of a stand-up comic for a career, and what were your goals getting in, and what are your goals now?
Wow, that's interesting. My goal was to the landscape was different when I started, but the goal was to get in, develop get TV credits, get an hour, get TV credits, and then tour and make money, and then write a TV show. And I think that's I think that's still a viable goal for me. It's like I'd like to do an hour. I'd like to do an hour on Netflix or whatever the next medium is where everybody's watching it. I would like it to be seen, in other words. So I do an hour, a CD, which I'm working on a CD right now, and then I would like to write a show and possibly star in it, but mostly I think I have that in me to write a show or a movie or something of that nature. I'm not sure what yet.
We've touched on social media a little bit. You just brought up Netflix.
Yeah.
And there's comics now that are putting they've got, instead of trying to fight for a Comedy Central or an HBO special, they're going right to Netflix. How much has that changed the industry already from you and your peers?
I just think it's whatever the next thing is. I use Netflix as an example because they're the people who are getting Netflix think they're getting seen. So it's whatever the next thing is. Netflix might get oversaturated, and then it's where are people going to go? Maybe something else will pop. I don't know. I'm not enough of a technology guy to be maybe everybody will have their own apps, and then you could just hit the app and everything that you've done. I mean, I'm sure they already have this, where it's the guy's special, all the guy's podcasts, all of his sketches, everything pops up. But it's a matter. I think Netflix is great. Obviously, I want to be on there, and Comedy Central has been good to me. But whatever the platform is that gets the most views, that's what I would like to do. I'm like every other comic. I think I would like to be seen. Regardless of what platform it's on, I would like to be seen. Yeah. I mean, all this work that we're doing in the club is that's pretty much what it's for, I would say, And aside from making money, going up there and developing an act so that we can get it seen and develop a fan base, and then keep turning over material the way that the guys I look up to, Bill Burr, Colin Quinn, David Tell, those guys have done,
I do miss Insomniac.
He's unbelievable. He's unbelievable.
That was one. I remember we were in Kansas City in 2003 for the NCAAs, and we're down at this one area, and then the next day I go back and Insomniac is on. I'm like, dude, I was just there. The same. So I felt I've never met the guy, but I felt like a kinship to him. It's I was at that bar, sitting in that exact spot as David Tell was. He probably recorded it a year earlier. But one thing that it seems to be a prevailing theme is the commonality or comparison or similarity between wrestling and stand-up comedy in the way is that, you want to be seen, you want to get out there, you're working hard, but the industry and the sport both seem very unforgiving at times.
Yeah, there's definitely a parallel there, and I'm sure the other guys have pointed it out, Greg and Joe and Adam, they've pointed it out. It's very similar in terms of working hard and training, and a lot of it being thankless and rising above adversity. It's very, very similar in that way, and being alone, also being as an individual sport. And I find this with other people who've played individual sports, whether it's tennis, other individual sports, they tend to gravitate towards stand-up comedy. And wrestling is a perfect because it's just, it's brutal. The training and the regiments and the actual match, it's all brutal. It's very, very tough. And stand-up comedy is that way, and it's similar in a lot of ways.
We got a guy out of here. He's from Chicago named Joe Rao. He made the world team in 2014 in Greco. He's a Division III champion at Elmhurst. He's training up here in Minneapolis, and he's getting into stand-up comedy. He's been hitting open mic nights. He actually was at a comedy show, and they brought him on stage to do something. I think he was out in L.A. or something. So Joe's trying to break into the industry, and from a guy who's been doing it almost 2 decades, what is some advice for somebody that has a wrestling background, that knows what it's like to fight and go through, and knows the lessons that wrestling teaches? What are some things that you can tell, whether it's Joe or anybody, when they're getting into this business to be ready for, and what they can prepare for?
I think getting into stand-up, being good at stand-up comedy is different than getting a following. And they're not necessarily the same. In terms of, I know what you have to do to get better at stand-up comedy, but the landscape has changed so much where it's you can gain a following without necessarily getting good at stand-up comedy. So I don't know. It's where do you want to put your eggs? The ideal situation would be to get better at stand-up comedy and also develop a following so that you have both. You have a solid foundation in stand-up comedy, so you're respected by your peers, and you also have a following where you're making a lot of money. But sometimes it doesn't happen that way. You could be a guy where it's you're very fundamentally sound stand-up comedy-wise, but you don't have the following, which is a lot of us. And the other way to go is, you have a podcast pop or Instagram video series pop, and you're famous that way, but you don't have as much technical stand-up experience. So stand-up comedy is you just go out and you hit as many mics as possible, and you write and you record them, and you work on your act, and you keep working it throughout the years until you get 5, 10, then 15, then a half hour, and then an hour. And then once you do that hour, you start on the next hour, and it'll get better and better with each hour. It's repetition and work ethic. And so I don't think that's rocket science, but marketing yourself and getting a following seems to be a little trickier for all of us,
I'm getting a little meta here to talk about podcasts. You've said that quite a bit. And
put the mushrooms away. Oh, wait. I'm sorry. I thought we were going to do mushrooms.
No. I'm
okay. Drug-free. You're a father. You can't do mushrooms. What are you going to tell your daughters?
Well, if I did mushrooms, I probably wouldn't even remember what I was doing to tell them. So it's a win-win for both of us here.
Let the dragon tell them, right?
Yeah. Never did shrooms. So I really
I'm glad you put that in there.
Yeah, I hope my wife's not listening to this one. But yeah, I've done way worse. Getting back to talking about podcasts, you did a podcast before recording this one, and it seems to be something that's also changed comedy. Brooks has a podcast where he talks to other comics about, it's called Entry Level. It's their first job. I think it's a great little niche topic. What was your first job? What was your worst job? Entry level type of stuff. And using Brooks's comedy, and I love listening to that show. And waiting for the podcast to go viral. I mean, now if you've got a podcast, you're on iTunes, it's like being in the phone book. Again, going where the people are, but you got to get found. There's a bunch of people on Netflix. But what is, the medium meant for stand-up comedy or comedy in general?
I think it's great because it removes those gatekeepers. Those gatekeepers who are I think this way, so you need this in order to get on TV. Now that's blown out of the water. That's the great thing about it. It's you can gain a following. You can connect directly with people. Now, and now the podcast market is pretty saturated. So it's what's the next thing that's going to elevate, Instagram, there's people just famous off Instagram. So there's no gatekeepers there. It's a direct connection to the consumer. And I think that's a great thing. It's a benefit to all of us, because if you can connect, it doesn't matter who you are. You can be elevated. But it's whatever the next platform is, Instagram is going to go from 1 minute. I think they're going to compete with YouTube now because they're going to go longer for videos. And that maybe that's the next thing. It's whatever the next thing is, we have to figure it out and learn to put content on it to be, to gain exposure. I think that's the thing. So it's a weird thing between, getting good at your craft or not even that, getting something that connects with an audience and then finding the technological platform of the time that's cutting edge to connect with people before it becomes saturated. Because once it gets saturated, then it's very hard to get listeners and followers because there's so much competition.
And the opportunity now is, I just to give you some background, I reached out to Mike the day before we recorded this. I've been trying to get a hold of, I actually reached out probably a year or two ago, and you see, favorable, and then I look and, oh, wow, you're in town. Let's just sit down and do this. And you made time for it, which I appreciate. But the podcast medium, again, It's portable. It's on demand. Somebody may listen to this, a year later and be like, "Oh, I want to bring that guy in to talk to my wrestling club or do a benefit." So there's the on demand aspect of it. There's the time shifted aspect of it.
That's great.
But
I'm available to do wrestling benefits. I'll plug myself. I'm available. I'm very,
Yeah, we haven't talked about where you can find your stuff. Actually, that's one thing where we buried the lead here, Mike. As far as
that's right.
You're on Twitter
at Comic Mike V. And I have my own podcast called No Disrespect, which is on Gas Digital. You can download it on iTunes.
No disrespect. I'm going to do bad. I'm going to actually no BS right now. But this phone sucks, so bear with me as
No problem. It's at Comic Mike V on Twitter. MikeVecchione.com is my website, and No Disrespect is my podcast. And I'm working on another CD right now. It's already recorded. I'm doing the editing, and hopefully it'll be on SiriusXM, within a couple of months.
I got to move my Game of Thrones podcast. I just started binging that.
Right.
All right, let's see. No disrespect. I'm using Overcast. Let's do this. I'm going to just to prove, man, trying to do this with one hand. I'm not as good as, no, never mind. I won't go there.
We're about 21 episodes in, so it's like we just started it really. It's, but it's doing good numbers on Gas Digital. We appreciate all the people who listen. And it's, me and another very funny comic named Justin Silver. And, we talk about issues of the day and, we're both New York City-based comics. He's Jewish, I'm Italian, and we go at it. So it's pretty fun. And we have our producer.
Dinner time, though.
Our producer is Shannon, and she's unbelievable. She's so great. I'm really bad technology-wise, and she really spoon-feeds me everything. And the way she deals with both of us, because we're insane, she really helps us a great deal.
As we finish up our year again here at Rick Bronson's House of Comedy. By the time you listen to this, he's probably off and gone. But
I'm out of here.
What is?
This is a great club. I love it.
Yeah, like I said, come for the comedy, stay for the poutine.
Yes,
good Canadian staple. But so where do you go from here? I mean, how long does a tour last for you? I mean, how much time do you get to spend? Is it home or is it basically a crash pad, New York?
No, I mean I work the clubs in New York, so I have a good presence there. Thank God the clubs work me, and I'm very happy. So I'll go and work, but then when I get stuff on the road, obviously I'll go on the road. I was in China and then home for a few days, and I did some spots, and then here in Minnesota, and then I'll go back to New York, and then Florida. I'm doing some shows in Florida, and then back, and then I'm pretty much in the city. I was out of town a lot in June, but I'm in the city more in July. It just depends month to month, how much road work I can book. So
I'm going to make the pitch right now. So the NCAA Wrestling Championships come here in 2020. They're in Pittsburgh next year. They're at the big stadium. They're not in Target. They're at the football stadium, US Bank Stadium. So it's going to be the one of the, it's going to break the record. We know that for size just based on the number of people that are going to be able to watch. So here's the put. We're going to put the pitch in right now. Rick Bronson's House of Comedy, great room.
Right.
Let's see. We can work you, Brooks, Joe Narvaez, Greg Warren, Adam Hunt. See if we can get the Super Bowl of wrestling comedians awesome. That weekend.
I think that would be unbelievable. I'm definitely down for that. That would be super cool.
We're going to try to make.
If we could put some. But Greg's a guy who could he's a smart guy, so maybe he can figure that out. But that's
maybe we can even throw Jay Moore a bone too.
Yeah,
he's not wrestling.
Yeah, that would be great, man. I think that would be awesome because then we can. But how would we watch the night sessions? I guess we could rotate and get all those guys on. We could just rotate nights.
See, my recommendation has always been when you come to nationals. Mm-hmm. See, I get in Tuesday because I got to work, so I can't have any fun Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. But Wednesday nights when people arrive,
right?
Boom. So I'm just throwing. It's actually Joe Narvaez's idea. He's been wanting to do this for years. He's been saying, "Hey, you got to talk to these guys. Get a wrestling comic tour." I think it'd be pretty cool. There's another guy that was on a Blood Round podcast, a stand-up comic. His name escapes me right now. But there's been. When I see people work wrestling into their acts, when I first saw Greg, it was on Comedy Central. I want to say in 2003, and he was talking about cauliflower ear. I'm like, hey. A week later, he was performing at the NWCA thing. I was like, hey, I just saw you on TV last week. So it's cool now that, when you see Adam Hunter talk about wrestling, you see you talk about wrestling, and people talk about you saying you need to talk to Mike Vecchione. Yeah. It's it's one of those things that really, as wrestling people, I like seeing wrestling people do well. So, and I like to thank you for spending the time here and basically, I know you're jet lagged. You got some shows.
No,
tonight,
I'm just tired because I'm just not. I'm not on a correct sleep schedule yet. So
I've got two kids. I feel you, man.
It messes me up.
I mean, my nanny just got back from Kyrgyzstan.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Is Kyrgyzstan a real place? That sounds like
The thing is, I've been to 3 former Soviet republics. I've never been to Montana.
Wow. Can I say something about wrestling as may or may not resonate? Like wrestling, I think for me and for a lot of guys, it's such an intense, grueling thing that but it's a love, and it was such a major part of my life. So, and it formed me as a person in a lot of ways, like my work ethic, especially. And also like I had a hard time accepting, I wasn't the most talented guy. So I had a hard time accepting losses. I had a hard time dealing with it. So it's like a lot of lessons. It's a sport that teaches you a lot of lessons. And I think that's why so many guys are so emotional about it and so tied to it. Like there's such a camaraderie there of guys who are former wrestlers. And I think that's the reason, it's life lessons, and it's like heavy emotional ties to the sport. So I'm grateful to the sport, and it's formed me as a human being in a lot of ways.
One of the most fun interviews I've had of the year. Mike Vecchione learned a lot about the world of stand-up comedy, his background as a wrestler, his time at Penn State. So, and again, he took that on short notice. It was one of those things, I saw it on Twitter on Thursday, Friday, mid-afternoon, Mall of America. He's sitting there, and he carved out time, and I appreciate Mike Vecchione and what he does because, we all need to be entertained. Are you not entertained? That's just really bad. Actually, I don't even think I've ever seen 300 or is it Gladiator? I don't even know. That's the bad thing. I can't even mention the movie quote right because I actually haven't seen the movie. That being said, want to thank Gary Paul out at Lehigh, one of the newest patrons of the Matt Talk Podcast Network. You can join the team at matttalkonline.com/join the team or go right to Patreon at patreon.com/matttalkonline. The latest team member, and he's part of the daily mailing list, which you can get at matttalkonline.com/news. Sign up for free. It is the summertime, but news does not slow down. I actually sent out a survey for some folks who had unsubscribed, and it seems like the feedback is they're hitting it during college wrestling season. Well, there's college news going on at all times. This is a curated list, and it is free at matttalkonline.com/news. Sign up, and I will not sell your data. And we are like GDPR compliant. That was just a real pain in the rear. So, moving forward, Final X. I'm going to have a lot of thoughts about Final X, but right now I'm still in the middle of this the research project and redesigning the Fargo Almanac. Fargo, the Cadet and Junior Nationals coming up July 12th through 20th. Fargo, North Dakota, the Fargo Dome, across the street from the B-Dubs. Yeah, it's going to be my 20th year covering that event. 20 years. I'm not that old to be doing something professionally for 20 years, it seems. But I have a mug that turns 20. It needs to be drinking on a fake ID. I'm just kidding. I actually maybe not know. But for those of you media types, Media Social is going to be that first night, the 14th, as actually the 12th is when we arrive, 13. Anyway, it's going to be Saturday the 14th. We're going to have an NWMA, National Wrestling Media Association social for you media types at Herd and Horns. Yes, owned by some wrestlers, including Steve Saxland, who will be joining the program in about a week or two to talk about what's going on at Herd and Horns. The Bison Turf has reopened. And, of course, the two-story Buffalo Wild Wings, a building built by North Dakota State Football and USA Wrestling in terms of how many people show up for it. So we'll be there, be doing a lot of shows from Fargo. Also, this is somewhat wrestling related, but Richard Immel and I are starting the long and short of it, a podcast with me and him talking mostly about things not wrestling related, but wrestling will be a part of it. I know a couple people out there have mentioned that some of our bonus times where we would combine short time and bonus points and come out with previews were like the first 30 minutes we weren't even talking about wrestling, and people seem to enjoy it. So we're going to take that and have some experimental discussions on the long and short of it. That more details about that. If you follow me on Twitter at Jason M. Bryant, you will find out information there. That will not be on the Matt Talk Podcast Network. That is a separate entity, and not going to cloud my thoughts about Game of Thrones and Big Brother into the wrestling discussion. But Richard getting back into that podcast game again, getting his podcast groove on. His pictures with the last couple events. He's moving into the world of photography now that he's not in wrestling full time, but he is still going to be around. And we will talk a little bit about that on the first episode of The Long and Short of It, which we will try to record at some point this week. We know we got new Big Brother coming out, and I'm about finished with Season 7 of Game of Thrones. So, no spoilers, y'all. Couple takeaways, quick takeaways from Final X in Bethlehem. 1, it was awesome. 2, Grace Hall is great. 3, John Gottschall. Wanted to say a shout out to you. We were talking, a guy that discovered wrestling when he came to Lehigh, came from North Carolina, went to college at Lehigh. My friend Brooke Zumas took him to wrestling matches, and now he's a wrestling fan. So really cool to see how wrestling people can then bring people into wrestling and then make them more wrestling people. So had a good conversation with John following the Final X, as long as I was also talking 80s movies quotes, or actually 90s movies quotes with the Clerks reference with Andrew Spey. Brian Hazard, as always, a pleasure to work with him the last 3 Final X events. Also, young wrestler Aiden, who was there with his dad, father-son camp. The names escape me right now, but remember they said they listen to me all the time, and man, I feel like a complete jerk face not remembering that. I even asked twice for the name, but I do remember the kid. He was there, excited to watch some wrestling father-son camp too. So great meeting you guys. Hopefully we will cross paths again, and I will not forget your name. It's one of those things that I really want to get names. I'm going to have to write them down every time, but normally my memory's pretty good. But lastly, Matt Gilbert at Resolite hooks it up with a custom small mat section digiprint with the classic Shure microphone, which I actually have here in my home office, and the Matt Talk logo. Presented it, not formally presented, but handed it off to me. I saw a picture of it on Twitter. It is just one of the coolest things I've ever gotten as a wrestling gift, so to speak. So now I've got a Matt section with a Matt Talk logo on it and a microphone. These are a few of my favorite things, and we're going to have some of those little mini Matt sections with Team Indiana going to be joining us and coming up with the wrestle. They have a dice game that they invented in Indiana, and it is. I won the tournament the last time I competed using that term loosely, and it was actually at the Bison Turf the night before it burned down. So I won that bracket, which was done on a napkin. I still have it, and so I did not have a chance to wrestle last year. Again, it's a dice. It's really cool. I mean, it is just it's pretty cool. And now Matt Gilbert has got a child on the way. He's not going to be able to present the wrestling mat, which we will roll the dice on as our competition surface, but he will be sending a couple along. So I will be giving updates, and I'm actually thinking about doing some nightly shows from Herd and Horns, but we'll talk about that as the time comes. But Matt Gilbert, man, thanks for that. I really appreciate that, and what you guys do up there in Pennsylvania. Yeah, that's the Pennsylvania region of Pennsylvania. I've probably lost all hopes. Never mind. We'll just talk about that when the time comes. Thank you, Matt. That was big time. That's clutch, crucial. Not all gas, not all brake, always clutch. That's all I got for you today. I'd like to again thank Mike Vecchione for his time, and I'd like to thank you for spending your time with me, because you've always got time for Short Time. The Short Time Wrestling Podcast is proudly outfitted by Compound Clothing. Shirts, singlets, custom gear orders, everything you need. Call up Cliff and the crew at cmpteamwear.com. First time listening? Well, you can change that by going to matttalkonline.com/getshorttime to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, or listen on your favorite podcatcher at matttalkonline.com/listen.
This show is part of the Matt Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, head over to matttalkonline.com.